Welcome to another edition of the MSDW Podcast. I'm your host, Jason Gumpert, editor of MSDynamicsWorld.com. My guest this week is Linda Rose, founder and CEO of RoseASP, a cloud solutions provider and Microsoft partner with a focus on Dynamics ERP and CRM solutions. RoseASP is publishing a new report on Dynamics SMB Partner views on the cloud, Microsoft's efforts with cloud-based products like Azure and Dynamics 365, and how these changes will impact their businesses. Linda's here to tell us more about the findings, which come just as Microsoft prepares to publicly release Dynamics 365. Hi, Linda Rose. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Jason. Glad to be here.
So you are preparing to publish a new Dynamics SMB Cloud Survey here in the later part of 2016. Can you tell me a little bit about your plans with this survey and some of the overall goals of it?
Absolutely. So we started this survey partially because we knew we were heading into some conference season where we would be able to meet with GP partners at Reimagine and NAV partners at Directions, and then again see both of those partners at Summit in Tampa, as well as customers. And we really wanted an opportunity to open a dialogue with partners and get a true understanding of how they were feeling about the cloud in general, how much they plan on selling in the cloud, what their goals are for the cloud. Of course, being a cloud provider, that's obviously near and dear to our heart. But with everything coming about and pre-announcements regarding Dynamics 365, we thought, well, it'd be interesting to ask some questions about plans around that product and goals. And so it's been a very interesting survey because obviously that has taken a lot of oxygen out of the air in both of those conferences, as well as a little bit with Summit. So a lot of post conversations after people have taken the survey, they kind of came up to us and said, hey, can you tell us about the survey results? Have you gotten them yet? We're really curious of what other partners are thinking. And I think a lot of people have responded to it. We have about over 100 respondents to that survey, and I think a lot of people wanted to hear more about how other partners were thinking in the directions that they were heading with both Microsoft products and maybe non-Microsoft products as well. So it's been a fun survey, and we've enjoyed working with partners and hearing what they've had to say about it.
Yeah, I mean, the timing really is key on this when you think about all the different elements of what's happening in the Microsoft channel right now, kind of converging at once between the launch of Dynamics 365, the next gear that the CSP program is entering into, the sort of the future roadmaps being a little better understood, I think, with NAV and GP than probably they were in the past. And and then I guess underlying that, what Microsoft's approach to Azure, all those things combined, I think really did make this a good time to be running this. Plus, it also happens to be this conference season, right, where you were. And I was also, at some of these events where Microsoft was talking to partners were expressing their views. So yeah, good timing. Let's dive into a few of the points, because there are a lot of them that are going to be in this preliminary report, a lot of different areas that you touched on that really do help sort of paint a picture of where partners are at with their views on the cloud. One that maybe we could start with is attitudes towards the cloud solution provider program and people's or partners' affiliation with it, if there are already Dynamics GP or SL or NAV partners. Can you talk a little bit about what you found there?
Yes, actually, we found that most partners were aware of the CSP program, and a good chunk had already applied in one way, shape, or form, whether they were going to be a Tier 1 or a Tier 2 partner. I think a lot of partners realize that's the only way they're going to be able to sell CRM, and of course now the Dynamics 365 products. So I think it's a natural progression of the next step. It's the next, document you need to sign with Microsoft. And I don't think there's been much hesitation with signing up for the program. Whether you're going to fully engage in that program is sort of yet to be determined. But in terms of people actually signing up for the program, we found that the majority of partners had done so, or at least were planning on doing that in the near future.
Did you get a sense of whether a lot of companies are actually looking to become a direct or become an indirect CSP versus sort of becoming an affiliate to an indirect?
We didn't ask that question, Jason, and we, in hindsight, probably should have. It was really only towards the end that we decided that we should add some Dynamics 365 questions in there or about the CSP program, because it was just, when we first started putting the survey questions together, it was early summer, and it really has amassed as the summer has gone along into the fall, where people have really shifted their thought towards the CSP program and to the new Dynamics 365 product line. So we didn't think to ask that question initially, but just from our conversations at the conferences, we gather it's 50-50. The larger organizations clearly are going towards that tier 1 CSP certification, and the smaller partners, maybe those who are part of a small organization, or maybe they're part of a master bar, they'll of course be part of the tier 1. But the smaller partners are saying, you know what, I don't really want to deal with the billing, and I don't want to deal with the 724 support, so I'm going to be a tier 2 player, which is the right answer.
Oh, yeah, certainly. And I wonder how many of the one-tier direct CSPs will really remain in that program long term. I think since it's really just getting off the ground here, that'll be interesting to watch for as well.
Exactly. It will be interesting, yes.
And, you were saying, conversations and information, with so many things sort of being announced and even sort of changing over the last few months, it had to have been sort of a tricky time to even run the survey. Like I know for example, pricing information started coming out about Dynamics 365 as this survey was live, which had to have been kind of an interesting point in time to be sort of asking these questions, even if it wasn't really something you could measure.
Right, and it's all about the margins in this channel, and so we had some idea of what the price points would be. Of course, we were under NDA and we couldn't obviously disclose that. So when we put that survey question together, we really were very clear about laying out different price points, because we had a sense that partners thought that the product, at least on the SMB side, would price out much higher than it ultimately did. So, we really wanted to see what was going to be interesting to partners. And of course, the announcement was made right towards the end of the survey. So we really didn't get enough participants towards the end that we could have a clear definition of how people felt before the pricing was announced versus post. But so the majority, if not 90% of the respondents did respond prior to the official announcement. And what was interesting, which of course now we know that Dynamics 365 on the SMB side will basically price out at $50 per seat. It was interesting to note that only 15% of the respondents said they were interested in selling Dynamics 365 if it were $50 or less, which means that 85% of the people really didn't want to sell it at that low price point. So, of course, now it would be interesting if we took another poll again to see, how people feel about the price point. But to me, it really epitomized how they truly felt in terms of what they were willing to invest their time and their salespeople in, at what price point was interesting to them.
Yeah, and I think that's probably not a huge surprise. If you're already let's say a GP partner, you probably have dipped your toes into SaaS ERP at some point, whether it's just looking at what else is out there, or a lot of them probably already sell a competing solution, you would just say a non-Microsoft solution, an Intact or a NetSuite or something else that gives them a SaaS option already. And I mean, you have to assume that they have a sense of, given the way they run their business now, what would make financial sense for them or business sense, right?
Right. I think most cloud solutions, like the Intacts and the NetSuites of the world, partners can assume a 30% margin on those products, which is exactly the same margin that the one-tier CSP partner would make, but obviously at a much lower price point. I don't know that Intact and NetSuite are selling seats at $50 a seat. So, being an accountant in a former life, it really made me wonder, well, how many seats would you actually need to sell to cover, let's say, $100,000 in costs? Now, whether that's a salesperson or marketing or whatever, a combination of somebody's salary and commission. And so we kind of went through that and assumed, okay, every seat will be sold at $50, and we're going to assume that you're a tier 1 player, so that you're going to get a 30% margin. And then, of course, Microsoft is talking about an 8% rebate. Now, of course, we don't know how long that 8% rebate will last, but let's just in the conversation. So that gives you basically 38 points to play with. And then when we did the math, we basically figured out it would take about 438 seats a month to actually pay for every $100,000 in costs. How you decide what those costs are, whether it's salespeople or marketing, it's up to you. But that's a lot of seats to have to sell to pay for $100,000. And I think if you compare that to potentially some other products and competing products, you wouldn't need to sell that many seats. And I think partners are going to go through that same math.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, I think there's a couple of sort of ancillary or related things that they are maybe weighing with selling 365 financials. I think one would be the Office 365 side. The other side would be apps that add on to 365 financials, right?
Right.
Would you kind of consider those the two sort of related sort of opportunities that Microsoft wants them to go after at the same time?
Absolutely. I think, and services, of course, right? So, I mean, I think we've all come to the conclusion that selling the product for margin is really not going to keep the lights on. So you're really selling the product for the services. And, if you're so inclined to create an app. Now, of course, I don't think the majority of the partners out there today across the GP and the NAV space are geared towards creating apps all day long. Of course, I think you have a more natural propensity on the NAV side to do that, because I think in general NAV partners are geared more towards customization of the NAV product historically. So I think as a general rule, those folks are more likely to create an app. I don't think your GP partners are as likely, because they've really relied on ISVs in the past to round out the solution and provide the total robust solution, whereas NAV partners have kind of created their own, resolved their own problems or deficiencies through creation of customization. So, I think NAV partners are more inclined, but then that also there was a lot of discussion after directions about, well, how do we really price these apps? And the traditional way that they may have priced an app using subscription pricing, which has kind of been our solution here in the past in the cloud, is really not going to work in this marketplace. They've all come to conclusions. Certainly, if you're selling an entire application for $50, your app, unless it just does some huge, plugs some huge holes and adds some huge level of complexity or additional features and benefits to the product, can you really price your app for more than $50 a seat? And that's, left a lot of people scratching their heads going, wow, how am I even going to price my app? Are we looking at $1 or $2? And it was interesting. I did have some conversations with some partners said, yeah, we're just going to price it out at $1 or $2, $3 and see what happens. And so that should be very interesting to watch.
Yeah, I heard some of that same thing. It's just they're stabbing in the dark at what they might charge and what it might bring back to them in terms of revenue. It seems like they're kind of going to wait and see, and again, not count on that to build their business on its own. I thought we could change gears a little bit to another element of the survey, and that was comfort with Azure, attitudes towards Azure by these partners. You got some findings in a couple different areas. There's the pricing side of it, and there's sort of the deployment and management side of it. Is there one area of partners' attitudes towards Azure that jumped out at you?
We put the survey out there, and one of the beginning questions we asked is, which products do you support? So that way we could slice and dice the data based upon GP-only partners, NAV-only partners, partners that sold both. And because we wanted to really see, and we felt there was probably differences between how these two partner groups would answer questions. And so, we're going to present the findings all up with the two groups combined, but I was able to slice and dice the data differently. And there were some really interesting things that came out by looking at the NAV partners separate from the GP partners. And NAV partners are clearly, I think, more comfortable in the cloud, and they're more comfortable putting something on Azure. Now, I got to be honest with you, both partner groups said they, as a general rule, are very uncomfortable pricing on Azure. They're less comfortable deploying on Azure, and actually, NAV partners were more comfortable than GP partners were deploying on Azure, but both groups were very uncomfortable pricing on Azure. I think part of that is there is a variable component to Azure that still exists if you go out and do your own thing. And then I think a couple of people just kind of got burned in terms of they thought it was going to be one price and then, left the cloud running all the time and got a bill back that was pretty horrendous, and we were a little surprised. So for whatever reason, Azure seems to still be a mystery in terms of how expensive it may be and which boxes to choose and what that really is going to run you on a monthly basis. But again, from deploying on Azure, we felt that NAV partners were more comfortable with that, and we really thought it was really kind of how that program was written. In general, I think it's more suitable for Azure. You can kind of do everything in one database, where GP, it has a Dynamics database, it has company databases, and then you have MR you have to install. So there's really three main components, and then you get into third parties, there's more stuff there. So there's a little bit more complex and the number of databases that you would put into an Azure container. So I think the GP partners in whole are just a little bit less comfortable with that than the NAV partners were in general.
Yeah, I mean, and there's just been a lot more work done, it seems like, over the last, 3 years or something with Nav on cloud platforms. Maybe not 3 years, but
Exactly.
at least for over a year. Whereas, I mean, for GP, it's really just, there's obviously been lots of hosting, you know that, but when it comes to Microsoft really embracing it with Azure, I mean, it's just starting now, right?
Right. And partners, one of the questions, of course, that was one of the few self-serving questions we had in the survey was, how inclined are you to work with a hosting partner? And it seemed like, the GP partners really wanted to embrace a hosting partner to help them through that, whether it was a private cloud or Azure, whereas the NAV partners wanted to work with hosting partners as well, but not to the extent that GP partners did. So they felt a little bit more comfortable doing this on their own.
I want to move on to attitudes on Office 365. That was another area that you were measuring. What did respondents say about selling Office 365, about, getting somehow involved with their clients' use of it? Is it catching on at all?
It's interesting. We thought for sure that since Dynamics 365 is so now integrated with Office 365 that we would see more partners wanting to pick up that product. We really only had one survey question that addressed selling O365. And based really on that one question, it was really more about a partnering question. We're like, would you partner with an O365 partner to get leads or to, just to provide a better overall solution to your customer? And we just really didn't see that the Dynamics partners were interested in developing necessarily those partnerships or buying those partners. They just kind of said, no, we're just going to continue to do our own thing. And I think, again, historically, it's just not been a high margin business for them. I mean, obviously there's services there, but there's not a whole lot of margin to be made on the product. So I think in general, Dynamics partners are all have been historically about making margin on the product. So they're going to stick with where they can make more in the sales process, understanding that landscape is changing. But I think historically that's what we've seen. And it was interesting. We didn't see much of a change in the survey either with regards to Office 365.
I mean, one signal I noted at least I think it was at Directions, was, this idea that with Dynamics 365 getting more of the attention and perhaps more of the incentives going forward, that larger, Microsoft partners who are CSPs who are going to be selling Office 365 heavily will be looking for help with selling Dynamics 365. And I think part of the rationale that I think they were communicating was, if you're looking for where Dynamics products are going to be sold, it's going to be in conjunction with Office 365. And so that's, yet another reason to get involved with an Office 365 reseller and, get into CSP. I don't know how much of that, I guess based on what you're saying. And again, a lot of the surveying was done, I think, before those events. That wasn't really on the top of mind with a lot of the respondents, huh?
No, it wasn't. And again, that's kind of more of the post conversations that we had. And we actually broke the survey into two parts. We did something with, initial responses based upon survey results. So our key findings based upon survey results. And then we did a section based upon observations, right? Because there's a qualitative data and there's a quantitative data. And we didn't want to mix the two. And we didn't want to, add our spin to the true, quantitative data. But we thought we could take more liberty there in our own observations, and that's kind of our key observations towards the end of the survey. And those are the true conversations that we had with people outside of just them, checking the boxes. And we feel that people will try to reach out and find an O365 partner that they're comfortable with. I don't know how you reach out to a Tech Data as a national organization or, an Ingram Micro as a national organization and say, hey, give me your Dynamics 365 leads. I think people need to ferret out how they're going to form those relationships. But I think that's going to need to happen because I think those people in general are going to be the folks that push this, that the SKU that they'll add on. I think it'll be interesting to see how those folks sell this product as well. Because, at the end of the day, on the SMB side, anybody can sell it. It's not like on the enterprise side where you still need to be AX and CRM certified to to sell the enterprise version. So, that leaves some of these larger LARs out of the picture. So they're going to be focusing more on selling the SMB side of it because you don't need any certifications. But at the end of the day, it still is an accounting system, and it still is, to some extent, a CRM system. We don't know what parts yet of CRM are going to be included in that. And you got to wonder, how well these people are going to be able to articulate the benefits and features of a Dynamics 365 financials.
Yeah, I think with regard to how much of a focus it really has on SMB or kind of the below NAV SMB tier of companies. I mean, I think in another year, and this is just purely speculation on my part, I mean, it could have parity with NAV in another year or something very close to it. And honestly, bringing in more GP features potentially as well on the financial management side where GP sort of excels over NAV, this is just a sort of a random unsolicited prediction, but, another year from now, those GP partners or NAV partners who aren't that interested might really grab their attention when they can sell something a lot more complex or more sophisticated, maybe is the word I'm looking for, as opposed to what it is now.
Right. Well, Microsoft has said that within a year it will have all the features of the starter pack of NAV that NAV 2017 currently has. So it will be that identical product from a feature and functionality set, plus have all the additional features and functionalities that Dynamics, single database, Cortana, analytics, all that kind of stuff that they're wrapping into the solution will have as well. So yeah, I mean, I don't know how that works. I mean, I guess the only time you would really sell NAV 2017 is if you want to bring it on premise, because otherwise it just makes sense. Or if you're regulated in some fashion and the single instance, or maybe you have too many customizations, or you need to customize it, then you would still continue to sell the traditional NAV 2017. But it sounds like the two of them are going to be virtually identical in a year or less.
Yeah, I suppose if someone's really committed to customizing, or if they want, what's in the extended pack, the manufacturing capabilities and some warehouse and distribution.
Right, which I think will become apps. People generate apps, and so those will be add-ons via apps. Yeah, I think that will round out that part of the solution.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing that'll keep it going is the 110,000 existing NAV customers who may want to upgrade and don't want to go to the cloud. That's what'll perhaps keep the on-premise version rolling along.
Yeah, and I do believe there are still a number of customers out there that, for whatever reason, continue to want an on-premise solution, and people have their reasons for that. I mean, on-premise is not going away by any stretch. I think it will get less and less over time, but as more people become more comfortable with the cloud, it's amazing how some people are still not there, but it's certainly moving in that direction, and they are vocal about it. Yes.
Yeah, if you tell someone who doesn't want to invest in cloud technology about all the cloud technology that's coming up the pike or whatever, they don't want to hear it. I mean, they tell you to sort of stop talking about that like it's so great because it's not interesting to them.
Yes.
And as as someone who does a publication, I hear that from the people who read that. And they're like, "Why are you telling me this? I'm not interested in that."
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that, Jason, because when I was at Summit, I actually perched myself high above the audience just so I could get a feel for how customers were taking in the announcement, right? Because Scott Guthrie did the announcement at Summit.
Right.
And it was a great presentation, and I don't know what the rest of the world saw, but we had a bit of a presentation before the live presentation in terms of what's included in the solution. And I think people were pretty impressed with what's there. Of course, that integration with Office is pretty slick, and some of the other things that they're coming out, it was a very nicely done presentation. But, I also got the sense as they moved into the Q&A phase of the presentation, I was really kind of surprised at the number of people that decided just to exit the audience because they weren't interested at this point in time. And so I had some conversations with some customers that actually came by our booth and said, "Hey, what did you think about it?" And then they're like, "This is really cool, but right now we're here to learn about the product that we purchased, and so maybe it's something that we we'll look into one day down the road, but right now we're interested in learning more about our Dynamics NAV, GP solution, whatever, AX, whatever the case was that they were there to learn more about, and that's what they were there to come to do, and that's what they were going to do." So
I noticed people leaving, and I remember thinking, like, where else do you have to be right now? You've come to Tampa, and this is the one thing going on. But yeah, no, I saw that people were sort of heading for the doors at that.
Yes. So, I think when they're ready for it, they'll consume it and not until then.
Yeah, I mean, I think I thought the most compelling thing from the three most recent events, and I guess we were both at, was for me was some of the ways that they're advancing that Office integration, especially with NAV, and I mean, I guess with Dynamics 365 too, but for people who are existing customers, I mean, that there's some really sort of slick stuff there, and I don't have a great grasp on how excited NAV customers are for that, but I mean, in my view, they should feel pretty good seeing what they've accomplished so far with that integration, even if it's being driven 90% by 365, and the need to push that product if it's filtering down to NAV, and I mean, perhaps it'll make it to GP2 to some degree, but I don't know. That should have the existing customers feeling pretty good about what they're seeing.
Absolutely, yes. So they definitely have a path to their future with Microsoft, and that's important. And it's interesting as well. And I think the one big aha moment I had as I came back from these three conferences, what's the obviously the product's moving forward, but what's the real upside for everybody right now? And the aha moment I had was, I think it's in that name Dynamics. They didn't call it something else. They kept the word Dynamics in there, and people are going to be hearing a lot about Dynamics 365, and they're not going to know what it is because there's a lot to consume there. Whether they use the enterprise version, whether they use the SMB version. So there's going to be a lot that Microsoft's going to put out in the marketplace. And the fact that Dynamics is in the name, I think really gives this entire channel the opportunity to sell whatever Dynamics product they think is appropriate for the customer. And, that actually leads to an interesting point on our survey as well, which was actually the most surprising response that we had, to me, of the entire survey, was that 52% of the partners felt that prospects would allow them to guide them to the correct cloud decision. And only 11% of prospects were asking for a vendor-supported solution like Intacct and NetSuite. That actually blew my socks off. I actually expected people to say, no, we're seeing more people asking for those vendor-provided solutions. And so the 52% was really the part that surprised me, is that partners felt like, we're the trusted advisor here. And that's good. It's good. It's a positive sign. But which means that partners view themselves as the trusted advisor to help the customer find the right solution. So if a lead gets distributed to them by Microsoft because they happen to sell both CSP and on-premise, I think the partner will have the opportunity to educate that customer not only about Dynamics 365, but some of the other Dynamics packages that are out there. And so I think net at the end of the day, I think it could be a real positive for the channel as a whole, because I think it's going to finally create more visibility around the Dynamics name and around Microsoft having ERP solutions, whether that's on-premise or in the cloud. Because I know people for the longest time, even back in the days when GP was originally purchased by Microsoft, that the channel felt like there was just no visibility whatsoever to the world that Microsoft had ERP solutions. And I think with Dynamics 365, that will change radically. And I think it's net going to be a positive for everybody in the channel.
That's a great point. I'm also very interested to see how 365 gets more visibility. I've been watching. I haven't really seen much yet, but I'm sure there's going to be some investments made that will raise its visibility. Right? You have to assume.
I think there will be. I think there's a pretty big bet on this product.
Well, I think maybe that's a great place to end. Still hope for and some optimism on what SMB partners really can deliver, what they really do know now. And Linda, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Jason. It's been a pleasure, as always.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of the MSDW Podcast. If you'd like to be on the podcast, drop us a line. You can reach me by email, jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. Until next time, we're MS Dynamics World signing off.